Heinrich Höss.
Ein Erbe, das man ungern hat. Also mir wäre auch lieber, mein Großvater wäre Gärtner gewesen und wahrscheinlich auch noch Häftling. Dann würde ich jetzt auch auf die andere Seite gehören und hätte weniger Probleme damit. Aber ich denke, ich habe eine Veränderung geschaffen, zumindest mal in meiner eigenen Familie, bei meinen Kindern, ein anderes, ein tieferes Bewusstsein geschaffen, wie es davor existiert hat über die Familie.
Heinrich Höss was born in Germany in 1965, marked from birth by a last name that still sends chills down the spine. He is the grandson of Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz and one of the architects of the final solution. While his grandfather oversaw the systematic murder of over 1 million people, he lived with his family in a villa beside the camp, an idyllic bubble where the screams, smoke, and stench of death were simply ignored. As a child, Rainer grew up in an atmosphere of eerie silence. In his household, the past wasn't questioned, it was glorified. He was told that his grandfather had been a prison director, a man of order and discipline.
And it was the first time in the age of 12 that I put my foot on a concentration camp called Dachau. It was the closest one to my boarding school, and there's all these plaques on the wall. And later on, the commandant, Rudolf Höss, the commandant of raises the biggest exterminator, wrote the same, like I wrote my name, the surname. And I asked my father and said, oh no, Ostern. They made a mistake, it was Hess. They spelled the name wrong. And I said, well, okay.
The Holocaust was a forbidden topic in the family, a looming shadow in every room, yet never named. And Rainer couldn't understand why people trembled when they heard his surname.
But in the first time where I conflicted with her, with the name was when I was in boarding school, and a gardener who was a survivor of Auschwitz get a lot of pressure on me, beat me, treat me, and I was not sure what I have done.
At 15, he finally discovered the truth. What he had believed until then was a deliberate distortion of history. That revelation shattered him. The man who stood proudly in family portraits was, in reality, a criminal of monstrous proportions. From that point on, inherited guilt began to consume Rainer from within. While his family chose denial, he chose the opposite path, direct confrontation.
And then I cut my lines to my family in 1985, when I became a father in the age of 17. And my own father called my son a bastard. And it was that time when I was clear in my life never to be part of that family. And in 1985, I took the consequences and cut the lines until today. They deny the Holocaust.
He severed ties with his relatives, rejected the legacy of hate, and decided to publicly expose the truth. In 2010, he visited Auschwitz alongside an Israeli journalist. That visit was documented and turned him into a widely recognized figure, both in Germany and abroad. He toured the barracks with students, showed them the infamous Höss Villa, and shared his story as a warning against glorifying the Nazi past. During that visit, Eva Moses Kor, a survivor of Josef Mengelé's medical experiments, embraced him symbolically as her adoptive grandson. That gesture marked a turning point. The grandson of a killer accepted the burden, asked for forgiveness, and stood with the victims. Rainer Höss tattooed the Star of David onto his chest, a visible scar, a declaration of loyalty to the fallen, and a bold act of defiance against everything his grandfather had represented. Since then, he has traveled throughout Europe denouncing anti-Semitism and the resurgence of far-right ideologies. He has participated in conferences, television interviews, and Holocaust memorial events, and he never changed his name. Rainer Höss kept it as a reminder of what happens when hatred is institutionalized and becomes the engine of a death machine.
People in my age, 15 and older, believe me, you cannot change these people again. So they're living in their world, so everything is fine, they're comfortable with it. But the youth, sometimes they have to rule our country. And if they're not educated in such a way, well, history is part of our world. And if we ignore history for the present time, how can we have a future?
Jennifer Teege. Jennifer Teege was born in Munich on June 29, 1970, the product of a brief relationship between a young German woman, Monika Hertwig, and a Nigerian student. She was given up for adoption shortly after birth and grew up with no contact with her biological mother. At 7, she was adopted by a German family who cared for her with love, but never revealed the truth about her origins. Everything changed when she was 38. In a Hamburg library, she stumbled upon a book that would alter her life forever.
I was not searching for a specific book. I was just strolling around, and suddenly I saw this book. It was on the shelf, and it had a red cover.
The title immediately caught her eye. Shouldn't I love my father? On the cover was a woman who looked oddly familiar. As she read, a strange unease crept in. But it wasn't until the final pages that true anguish hit.
And there was a summarization, and I could read biographical details. And these details I knew from the paperwork surrounding from my adoption. So when I saw this, somehow, I don't know what happens in the brain. I'm not a brain specialist, but it became clear to me this must be a book, a very special book, and it was a book about my biological family.
Jennifer realized the truth. The author was her birth mother, Monika Hertwig, and the man described with fear and revulsion was Amon Göth, her grandfather. The revelation was crushing. Amon Göth had been commandant of the Płaszów concentration camp in Kraków, Poland, one of the most brutal war criminals of the Nazi regime. During Operation Reinhard, he actively participated in the creation and management of extermination camps like Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Majdanek. After the war, he was captured by US forces and sentenced to death. His final words, "Heil Hitler."
For me, at least, it felt I had no contact with my inner self, and I felt tired, and I felt full of questions in my head with no answer.
For Jennifer, learning this was like the ground falling out from under her. She took the book home, reread it carefully, and spiraled into a deep emotional crisis, marked by post-traumatic stress. For weeks, she struggled to process what she'd learned. Her identity was shattered. From being an anonymous publicist, she had become the granddaughter of a mass murderer. And amidst all the confusion, one name echoed the loudest, her mother's.
After I found the book, I had a lot of questions. Questions about the history, but also questions about our relationship. And there's a blank spot in the year 1970 when I was born. So I wanted to meet her and to find answers to all these questions that were mounting up. And she was brought up by my grandmother, who never really told her about her father. So she also grew up with a kind of family secret.
It was agonizing to be genetically tied to a psychopath. Her mixed-race appearance, being the daughter of a black man, would have been enough for her grandfather to execute her on sight. But over time, she turned that wound into a quest for meaning. With help from a psychologist specializing in Nazi descendants, she dug into her family history, visited Auschwitz, Płaszów, and Goeth's former home. That personal journey became the basis for her book, My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me, in which she recounts her path to understanding without justifying or forgetting. In it, she declares firmly, guilt is not inherited, but responsibility is.
So when I went to school, in history class, we did talk about the Holocaust. We did talk about the World War. But it was only on an academic level.
People were not talking about their own family experiences.
About their own family experience. And this is the difference.
Teague believes the past must have a place in our lives, but not rule them. Unlike her mother, who was consumed by the family's legacy, she strives to confront it with critical distance. Today, as a writer and speaker, she promotes historical memory and Holocaust education, convinced that confronting the past is the only way to prevent its return. Colleen Bettina Quandt.
Magda Goebbels fue mucho más que la esposa de un ministro nazi. Convertida en figura pública del régimen, participó activamente en la construcción simbólica del ideal ario. En 1931 se casó con Joseph Goebbels, jefe de propaganda del Reich, con Hitler como testigo. Desde entonces, su hogar se volvió centro de reuniones del poder nacionalsocialista. El propio Führer visitaba con frecuencia a la familia y mostraba un afecto especial por sus hijos.
It all began with a last name carrying the weight of two histories, Nazism and German capitalism. Colleen Bettina Quandt was born in 1974, one of the heirs to the Quandt Empire, one of the most powerful industrial families in Germany. Her father, Harold Quandt, was the son of Magda Goebbels, First Lady of the Third Reich, and industrialist Günther Quandt.
But Günther Quandt had a stronger link with Nazi Germany than the supply chain of thousands of slave laborers in exchange for ammunition and batteries. His second wife divorced him and instead married one of the chief architects of the Nazi regime. Goebbels was the chief propagandist and also doting stepfather of Günther and Magda's son, Harold Quandt.
The Quandt family history traces back to the textile boom of the 19th century. Günther Quandt built his fortune producing uniforms for the Imperial German Army during World War I. After the war, he expanded into chemicals, electronics, and automotive industries. In 1933, the same year his ex-wife Magda married the Nazi propaganda minister, Günther joined the Nazi Party. By 1937, he was a Wehrwirtschaftsführer, a key supplier to the Nazi military. That made the family complicit in the Reich's brutality.
Günther Quandt ended up using about 60,000 forced and slave laborers across his battery and weapons companies. But the topic of forced and slave labor did not come up at all during his denazification trial.
As the family grew richer from the deportation of Jews, Harold Quandt, Magda and Günther's son, served as a pilot in the Luftwaffe. In 1944, he was captured by Allied forces in Italy and sent to a POW camp in Libya. He was released in 1947, and in 1954, after his father's death, he took over the family empire. Alongside his half-brother Herbert, he led a new era of expansion, especially with BMW, where the Quandt family still holds major shares. None of them were ever prosecuted. The family only grew wealthier.
La responsabilidad nunca alcanzó a los herederos. Harald Quandt dejó una fortuna considerable a sus hijas. Colleen, Gabriele, Annette, Katarina y Patricia recibieron el patrimonio conjunto tras el fallecimiento de ambos padres en 1978. La herencia incluía acciones de BMW y otros conglomerados industriales.
But Colleen, keeping a low profile, chose a radically different path. Unlike other descendants of perpetrators, she didn't become an activist, write books, or appear on television. Her transformation was quieter, but perhaps even more profound.
Colleen Bettina Quandt tenía 16 años cuando descubrió que su abuela era Magda Goebbels, esposa del ministro de propaganda nazi y responsable del asesinato de sus 6 hijos, antes de suicidarse en el búnker de Hitler. Hasta entonces, vivía como heredera de una de las mayores fortunas industriales del país, construida en tiempos del régimen. En una decisión que marcó su ruptura definitiva con la familia, se convirtió al judaísmo y contrajo matrimonio con un empresario judío, descendiente de sobrevivientes del Holocausto. Mientras su entorno mantenía el silencio, ella optó por una identidad nueva, ajena a la herencia ideológica recibida.
To some, her conversion was a symbolic break from the past. To others, a provocation. In any case, the contrast was stark. The granddaughter of Joseph Goebbels, the architect of Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda, converted to Judaism. In 2011, the Quandt family commissioned an independent study on their Nazi ties. The report exposed grim details, and the family publicly acknowledged their links to the Third Reich. But that recognition didn't lead to symbolic change. Family offices still bear the names Gunther and Harold, and the Herbert Quandt Journalism Award is still given. Colleen lives with that legacy, among inheritances, names, and silences that cross generations. Katrin Himmler. What happens when one of the greatest monsters in history is part of your family tree? Katrin Himmler was born in 1967 in Dinslaken, Germany. A political scientist by training and a writer by necessity, she is the great niece of Heinrich Himmler, architect of the final solution and supreme commander of the SS. From a young age, she carried a last name that could not go unnoticed. As a child, she wished she could change it. As a young woman, the weight of her family's past affected her deeply, physically and emotionally. She spent years sick, caught between inherited guilt and the silence passed down by earlier generations. But instead of viewing her name as a lifelong curse, she chose to face it as a moral responsibility.
Und ich denke mal, dass also nicht nur einerseits war es so, dass mein Vater sehr früh, sehr offen gesprochen hat über die familiäre Konstellation, über die Tatsache, dass Heinrich Himmler sein Onkel war, sein Patenonkel sogar, und dass er schreckliche Verbrechen begangen hat. Und es war für mich sehr früh klar als Kind, dass es eine sehr große Belastung ist, eine emotionale Belastung für ihn und damit auch für mich oder für uns, dass wir verwandtschaftlich in so einer Nähe zu diesem Verbrecher stehen, zu diesem Massenmörder. Das habe ich immer als...
In 2005, Katrin published The Himmler Brothers, a German family history, the result of a deep investigation that uncovered truths buried in archives and within her own genealogy. The book reconstructed the lives of the three Himmler brothers, Gebhard Ludwig, Heinrich Luitpold, and Ernst Hermann. It wasn't merely an act of remembrance, it was a moral autopsy. Her grandfather, Ernst Hermann, had been actively involved in the Nazi regime, although the family narrative had always painted him as marginal. But documents revealed a different truth. He wasn't an innocent bystander, he was a cog in the Nazi machine.
Als kleine Fische erscheinen mussten neben ihm. Und das hatte eben lange zur Folge oder hat bis heute in Teilen der Familie zur Folge, dass nicht kritisch hinterfragt wird, was haben die anderen Familienmitglieder eigentlich damit zu tun gehabt. Das war eine ganz starke Entlastungsfunktion, die Heinrich da übernommen hat für den Rest der Familie.
She realized the family's silence wasn't ignorance, it was willful denial. Her grandmother Paula, who raised her children alone after the war, never wanted to speak of the past. She claimed she knew nothing of the crimes. But Katrin came to understand. She didn't want to know. The book triggered mixed reactions. Some saw it as betrayal, others as something necessary. Katrin refused to be paralyzed by shame or guilt. For her, writing was a form of release. Eventually, she entered a relationship with a Jewish man whose family survived the Holocaust. Her last name was never a barrier. On the contrary, it became a symbol of possible, though never total, reconciliation.
Also für mich war das irgendwann so, dass ich das Gefühl hatte, ich kann mit diesem Namen leben inzwischen. Ja. Aber für meinen Sohn möchte ich einfach die Chance geben, da einen Neuanfang zu machen, von Anfang an diesen anderen Namen zu tragen. Das ist ja etwas anderes, als einen Namen abzugeben, mit dem man aufgewachsen ist, mit dem man lebt. Ich denke, das ist sehr viel schwieriger. Also ich werde auch immer wieder...
With a calm voice and sharp words, Katrin Himmler showed that evil is not inherited, but it leaves deep scars. And confronting it from within, is a way to honor the truth and restore dignity to history. Today, she carries her name with less pain, because she knows the real burden isn't the name, it's silence. Bettina Göring.
Oh ja, ich sehe Hermann Göring ähnlich. Ja, das ist ja die ganze Sache. Ich sehe ihn wahrscheinlich mehr ähnlich als fast seine Tochter, so ungefähr. Mein Bruder sieht total aus wie die Mutterfamilie und ich sehe aus wie meine Vaterfamilie total. Manchmal bin ich neidisch, weil die andere Familie ist viel gesünder. Das ist gemein, ja? Ich habe diesen anderen Kram geerbt.
Hermann Göring was one of the darkest architects of the Nazi regime. Founder of the Gestapo, initiator of the first concentration camps, and commander of the feared Luftwaffe, he was also a driving force behind the final solution, the mass extermination of millions of Jews. Cruel, ambitious, and decadent, he amassed stolen art, hosted orgies, became addicted to morphine, and wielded absolute power under Hitler. After the war, he was sentenced to death at Nuremberg, but committed suicide in his cell in 1946, evading justice. Decades later, that last name would return in a very different story. Bettina Göring, his great-niece, was born in 1956 in Wiesbaden, Germany. A writer, therapist, and practitioner of Oriental medicine, she devoted her life to escaping a blood-stained past she never chose. Her personal journey became one of searching for redemption. As a child, Hermann Göring was simply Uncle Hermann. Her father, Heinz Göring, adopted by Hermann, was also a Luftwaffe pilot. Everything changed when Bettina was 11 and saw images of the Holocaust on television. The truth was overwhelming. Her great-uncle was a historical executioner. When she confronted her grandmother, she was met with denial.
Me and my grandmother were born exactly opposite. To dates, too. So we just were fighting from day one. And I don't know, I have a great sense of justice. I just hated it, how she treated other people with disdain. They were below her.
It didn't take long for Bettina to recognize that this was rooted in hidden Nazism. At 13, she rebelled, ran away from home, and severed all family ties. She lived in hippie communes, fell into drug use, and suffered multiple breakdowns. She traveled to India, became a follower of Guru Osho, and eventually settled in the US, where she changed her name, got married, and disappeared from public life. She kept her distance from her family. Her life became a kind of inescapable penance. Redemption came through Ruth Rich, an Australian artist and daughter of Holocaust survivors. They met through a mutual friend. At first, Ruth felt repulsed, but over time, a sisterhood emerged, built on shared catharsis. They became mirrors for one another. Their story was documented in bloodlines. Only by facing the pain of a victim can healing begin, said Bettina. Thanks to that process, she finally found the strength to travel to Israel. There, in the land of the victims, the great niece of one of history's worst criminals found a form of forgiveness. Each of these descendants of Nazism has found their own way of coping with the weight of their names. Some chose rupture, others confrontation, but all chose not to forget, not to stay silent, and not to let history repeat itself. Where their ancestors left ruins, they seek to plant memory. They didn't choose their name, but they do choose the legacy they want to leave. And that choice, lonely, painful, and conscious, is their way of making sure the horror never happens again. That's all for today's episode from Military History. If you enjoyed this story, leave us a like. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep bringing you more fascinating content like this. Until next time.